state police investigators told me early on in this case is that they theorized that Richard Levine molested over 250 people during the course of his priesthood.
He was here all the time. He was like part of the family.
The state police came in and asked us if we knew our sons had been assaulted and that Father Levine is a first prime suspect of the murder of my son.
The monster we will discuss today hid in the pews, the confessionals, the very heart of the church itself. Now come into the murder she shed, my little true crime nerds. Don't mind the thunder, the Lord likes to make an entrance. You're just in time for tonight's little morality lesson. Blessings, my little flock. I am Sister Holly, nun extraordinaire, your guide through the darker corners of the murder she shed. Before we begin, I need a small offering that doesn't include, well, emptying your little pockets. All it involves is walking your little sinful fingers down to that subscribe button. Do it, and I won't make you kneel in the confessional. Not if you're willing to play nice with this nun. Don't push it, though, and let's just say I have very persuasive ways of making people repent. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nuns aren't supposed to tell ghost stories or gossip about murder. But trust me, after what I've seen in these pews, a good haunting sounds downright wholesome. Tonight's tale takes us back to 1972 to a sweet altar boy named Danny Croteau. He believed every word the priest told him, and that, my dear, was his first mistake. You see, faith can move mountains, but it also can dig graves. Oh yes, first let's talk about our priest, young Richard Levine. Though back then they called him Little Dickie. He wore his curly hair long and was a talented artist and painter. It was never a question that he had become a priest. He was born into the church, raised on rituals and rosaries, the kind of boy who could recite prayers before he could even tie shoes. But even as a child, there was something off. His laughter came at the wrong moments. His kindness felt rehearsed, and the neighborhood children, bless their little hearts, thought he was just the odd churchy boy, but they still liked him. They called him weird. I call him a warning the world ignored. His friends would say that when they would visit Richard's home, his mother could always be seen dressing, let's just say, not like a nun. Not at all. She dressed like Jesus wouldn't like. His mother definitely was no nun. She was always particularly flirty with the now teenage Dickie, and something just seemed weird about their mother-son relationship. Once his pals even came up on the two of them in lounge chairs sunbathing in the backyard. She was topless. Dickie's hands was on his mother's breast. Now the good Lord sees all things, but even he must have turned his eyes now. And then when it came to little Dickie Levine, there was a darkness in that boy even before the collar ever touched his neck. While other children played stickball or chased fireflies, Dickie was busy chasing shadows. He had a fascination with the strange, the occult, the unseen, the things best left uninvited. One night, he locked his own baby sister in the basement of an unfinished house and left her there till the sun came up, and the searchers found her crying in the dark. And the animals, oh mercy. The neighborhood boys hunted squirrels and frogs for sport, but Dickie, he took it a step too far. He liked to watch things die. He'd inject animals with bleach, watch their little bodies twist and tremble. And when it was done, he'd box up the remains and hold himself a funeral in the backyard like some deranged priest presiding over his own kingdom of the damned. Now, some of young Dickie Levine's antics might have seemed comical at first glance. Not that one, though. The kind of mischief folks might shrug off as youthful foolishness, but sin often dresses itself in laughter before it bares its teeth. Not long after high school, Dickie brought a 14-year-old neighborhood boy into his home. The poor child went along thinking Dickie's little sister, whom he kind of fancied, would be there. But when they arrived, no parents, no sister, just Dickie and his wicked sense of amusement. The boy later said Dickie tried to hypnotize him, to make him take off his clothes, get naked. And when the spell didn't work, Dickie just laughed and said, "Yes, you can't be hypnotized," like it was all some harmless joke. Dickie attended Assumption Preparatory School, an all-male Catholic boarding school 45 minutes east of Springfield, Massachusetts. Sorry, this nun has a problem saying Massachusetts. Sometimes I actually accidentally say a naughty word when I say it. Sometimes I actually say Massachusetts. And so I prefer not to say that part because nuns shouldn't talk like that. Dickie was an average student who mostly stayed in his own little world. Dickie was involved in a disturbing incident just after graduation. He got a summer job as a recreation assistant or a counselor of sorts at a small park in Chicopee. Barely a month later, Dickie was shown the door. Dismissed, as they so delicately put it, for being an undesirable person to be around children. I've seen my share of sinners, but when a man gets banned from a park full of children after 30 days on the job, that's not divine coincidence, my dear. That's a warning straight from heaven itself. While attending school to prepare for priesthood, Dickie's grades, they hover barely above average. He earned just a single A in 4 years. Graduated in 1962 with a master's in theology, ranked 5th among 10 students, still blazingly average. He was, well, to put it plainly, just your average dick. I suppose that didn't sound right coming from a nun. I'm only a nun, not an angel. When the church reviewed young Dickie Lavigne's record, let's just say the notes weren't exactly glowing. Said he was best suited for general parish work, like his church code for keep him busy so he stays out of trouble. They even wrote, and I quote, he should never be allowed to teach. Now, if that doesn't set off the heavenly alarm bells, I don't know what does. Oh, and apparently poor Dickie needed to be consoled in difficulties and would require friends to aid him in his troubles. Translation: he's a handful and someone's going to have to babysit him forever. But did that stop him? Of course not. On May 14, 1966, Bishop Weldon himself laid hands on him at St. Michael's Cathedral, a grand echoing temple of marble and stained glass, and just like that, our troubled little Dickie became Father Lavigne. Every church Father Lavigne was sent to only lasted a few months because he just got on everybody's nerves. At one church, he made 2 friends who were doctors that attended the church, and that was only because, well, these doctors enjoyed his fascination with the occult. On Halloween night, Lavigne went with the doctors to a local cemetery, and they tried to communicate with the dead. Something us nuns do not advise. You can get some very pretty, naughty spirits. You try to communicate with the dead. Seen it myself. You don't want that to happen. He also had a way of making friends with the altar boys. His interest in kids led to close relationship with scores of family, and the families adored him. He'd drop by 2, 3, sometimes 4 nights a week for dinner at homes with children, often without so much as a phone call. Half the time he'd already be out back, lighting the grill before anyone even knew he was there. Not even kidding. But it wasn't the parents who got his real attention, oh no. It was the children, especially the boys. To them, he was the cool priest. The one who ruffled feathers, told jokes, and made them feel like he was one of them, a big brother and a caller. He wrestled with them, roughed them up in play like an older brother that maybe knew a little too much. He blurred lines the way some men blur commandments, and folks mistook his charm for goodness. Father Lavigne, the friendly priest, always had a way of making families feel, well, charmed. He whisked the altar boys out of school to serve masses and funerals, then helped them wriggle out of their little stiff, they're called cassocks afterwards. Oh, Lordy, as a nun, I don't want to know what a stiff cassock is. sound right. I'm going to stay innocent on that. And the wine, he offered them sips from the chalice, but only in the empty church after morning mass. Just a little taste, he said. Innocent, he said. The devil himself could have taken notes. He dragged them to movies in his rectory, letting them watch Hitchcock, gory crime, horror flicks, films their parents probably would have fainted at. Then there were trips to Friendly's for ice cream, drives in his car, and the Playboy magazines tucked in the front seat and under the mattress. And the gifts, my stars, the gifts. Rosaries, crucifix, trinkets, and sometimes things far beyond a family's means. Stereo equipment. Week-long excursions across New England. Charming, generous, saintly on the surface. But remember, darlings, even the sweetest candy can hide a razor blade. Generosity wears many faces, and in Lavigne's case, one was downright sinister with a bow on top. Father Lavigne's favorite retreat was a remote property in Asheville, Massachusetts. A small A-frame he built on his parents' land deep in the woods where the gravel driveway disappeared into the shadowed trees. During the summer, the younger boys were sent to sleep on the deck under the stars, exposed to the night, while the older boys occupied the interior, charming, cozy, and completely cut off from prying eyes. By 1972, the hideaway was complete, much of the work done by the altar boys themselves. On one exterior wall, Lavigne had painted St. Luke, the church's patron, saint of artists, a saintly image in a very unholy place. Hidden from neighbors and visible to passing cars tucked at the end of that lonely drive, the cottage became his perfect little world. The forest held its secrets quietly, just as he had intended. This is when the Croteau family comes into the story. Pearl and Bunny Croteau had 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. Danny Croteau was the youngest boy. Danny's mop of dirty blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a nose spotted with freckles gave him a permanent look of mischief. Chatterbox was a bright but a chronically distracted daydreamer who rattled on constantly about things like becoming a scientist or going on a safari. A real Huck Finn type of boy. He was friendly, some said, overly so, and talked to anybody. The children in most of the neighborhood attended Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, a Catholic school for kindergarten through junior high, just a couple of miles from his house. At their local church, St. Catherine's, Father Lavigne was the priest. Danny became an altar boy at this church. Danny was equal parts angelic altar boy and a trouble soul trying to grow up fast in a rowdy group of boys he called his friends. This group of friends was known as the Circle. Mischievous, reckless group of boys who thought rules were merely suggestions. They smoked cigarettes and a little wacky weed, sweet stolen beer and liquor, and raised enough hell to make the church bells tremble in their towers. Circle began as a place for people to relax and read. It was taken over by a group of local troublemakers that included Danny and 3 of Danny's older brothers. Many of the group members later said their circle, years later, left them alcoholics and drug addicts. They tossed so many beer cans into a gully in the nearby woods it became known as Bud Hill. They always needed money for their vices, so many habitually stole from their own families, from local stores, and from cars that were left unlocked. Danny was by no means a seriously troubled or bad kid. He may simply have been trying to grow up too fast. Father Lavigne at first spent most of his attention on Danny's older brothers, till Danny became an altar boy himself around the age of 9 or 10. And then, my dears, the boy couldn't get off the bus fast enough. He ran straight to the rectory every single day, as if drawn by some invisible string. They were together every Friday and Saturday night, and Danny served at every Sunday Mass side by side with the priest. And during vacation, well, he saw him at least 3 times a week. In the eyes of the neighborhood, they were just inseparable. But sometimes inseparable isn't a blessing. It's a warning. Perhaps a warning of some serious priest grooming. Because later, when the boys would see Danny get picked up from the circle, they saw Danny cry before he would get into the car. First, I guess Danny felt like priest was kind to him, but things began to change. The proof of Father LAVIGNE being a predator wouldn't be found out until after Danny was brutally murdered. On April 7th, 1972, then 13-year-old Danny was found in his bedroom by his mother, wearing a suit. Danny told his mother he was going somewhere with Father LAVIGNE. She heard nothing else until the clock struck midnight, when LAVIGNE called asking if Danny could stay over at his house. She agreed, trusting the man in the caller, as most did back then. Danny returned around 9 the next morning, looking pale and lifeless. He said little, barely moved, and complained that his stomach hurt. By the end of the day, he had vomited several times, a body rebelling in quiet protest. On Friday, April 14th, 1972, Danny was excited about the Easter weekend. After school, Danny played kickball with some of his friends. But by 4:30 that evening, nobody knew where Danny had gone. Danny's mother, Bunny, thought he had gone to a scout meeting. But when his father, Carl, got home at 8:30 that evening, Danny was still not home. Worry began to gnaw at them as one by one neighbors admitted they hadn't seen Danny since he left the neighborhood. Bunny, bless her little heart, kept thinking of the boys' chatter all week about fishing early on Saturday. Naturally, her mind went to water. Could he be in some pond or stream? No fishing gear was missing, of course, but Carl checked anyway, peering into every nearby pond and trickling stream as if the boy might have simply vanished into the reeds. Bunny made call after call. Worry turned into concern. At 9 o'clock, she rang Danny's scoutmaster, only to be told there was no meeting that night. By 10:30, she was calling Father LAVIGNE. She asked if he had seen or heard from Danny. His answer, calm and troubled, he simply said no. At 11, his mother called the Springfield police, but they refused to take a report until he was missing 12 hours. Carl and Bunny did not sleep that night. They sat in the kitchen like shadows themselves, heads bowed, whispering prayers into the dark as if the walls might answer them. When Saturday dawned, it was a dreary, wet day from the start, but they thought perhaps Danny had wandered off on an early morning of fishing, oblivious to time and danger. At 7:30, Carl set out again, his footsteps echoing on the empty street. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had caught the tremor of unease. Danny was missing. Phones rang like church bells in the wind. Children pedaled their bikes in frantic circles, and an invisible tension seemed to hang over every porch and fence. Around 9 o'clock, Danny's brother Joseph gathered 3 friends and they biked 6 miles to the river where he and Danny had fished with LAVIGNE under a bridge. What they found was a scene no child should witness. The dirt road from East Main down to the river clogged with fire trucks, ambulance, and a dozen police cars, their sirens silent now but still screaming in memory. Fortunately, the boys were turned away, so they pedaled back home unaware that something far darker than missing children had already taken root by the water's edge, something that would haunt the town for decades. Unaware that their brother wasn't just missing but almost unrecognizable from the beating he had taken before his death. That morning, the police had received a call from a local fisherman about a body that had been located in the water near the bridge. Now, my little sinners, speaking of Danny's body is not something a proper nun takes lightly. Much as I enjoy a good tale of mischief and mayhem, some truths are not meant to be spoken by nuns. The sight of this boy's body is almost too much for a nun to say, but it is my duty. After the police covered Danny's body from the water, they realized that he was still fully clothed. He had been badly beaten, covered with horrific head wounds. The right side of his head and face was a patchwork of grisly gashes and indentations, and his jaw was broken below his mouth. Usually back in them days, small towns did not have their own medical examiner, so autopsies were performed by local doctors with little, if any, forensic training. The cause of death was summarized. Daniel came to his death as a result of multiple blunt injuries of the head with fractures of the skull and lacerations of the brain. He was brutally beaten to death, killed by multiple savage blows to the head, and also later they would find that the killer also tried to strangle the little boy. Danny had also been given alcohol and was over twice the legal limit for an adult. Pubic hairs and red fibers were found on his underwear. The fibers all over his socks as well. Before he was killed, Danny was walking around shoeless. Blood at the scene was Danny's type O, but on the straw and the rope, they found type B. My dears, there by the edge of the river were two violent crime scenes where Danny had fought for his life, and even recounting it tightens the chest and chills the soul. Under the bridge, 16 feet from one of the great support pilings, there was a pool of blood, 12 inches by 6, surrounded by the cruel evidence of a scuffle. The dirt bore the cruel story, drag marks stretching 83 feet to the river's edge, where a second frenzied beating awaited him. The man had already been near death when the rage descended again. Overkill, pure and unhinged, left his signature everywhere. At the water's edge, blood sprayed in a 15-foot arc, saturating grass and earth. A bloodied rope, a crumpled straw, even a fist-sized rock matted with hair and blood. All were silent witnesses to the horror. Rain may have washed away what came before, but nothing could hide what the attack left behind. And just a few feet from that first pull under the bridge, fresh tire marks hinted at a vehicle parked backing out and speeding away into the darkness. Roland, a local who lived near the crime scene, remembered a car speeding toward the river that night, headlights off. Thought to himself that night, wonder what that person is up to. He had to have been up to something. Horrible mishandlings of the killer's tire prints was the first of many disastrous mistakes. The tire impressions were made by two men insufficiently experienced in the process. Also, investigators failed to consider that a piece of stonework from the concrete bridge piling may have also been a weapon. A trove of evidence was gathered, each piece photographed, cataloged, and collected. Reminders of a night no prayer could undo. There was the bloody rope and straw, a torn jacket pocket, a Certs gum wrapper, a stained scrap of paper, a sullied newspaper, several stones, and most crucial of all, the rock, still matted with hair and blood. The state police removed much of it, and it was never seen again. It just disappeared, all evidence. Did this involve some sort of cover-up? Before Carl and Bunny could face the unthinkable, identifying their boy, they stopped by the church, as any grieving parents might, just to seek comfort in their faith. There stood Father LAVIGNE, ever the picture of pious concern, his collar straight, his voice soft as a confession. When they told him Danny had been found murdered, he tilted his head and asked if they wanted him to come along. Such compassion, or so it must have seemed. When the time came to identify the body, poor Carl could hardly breathe. When you know it, Father LAVIGNE stepped forward, ever so eager to volunteer. He said he'd do it, to spare the father the pain. Later that day, LAVIGNE solemnly advised Carl and Bunny to keep Danny's casket closed. They wanted it open to see their son again, but he insisted, you don't want to see Danny like that. Such conviction, such certainty, as though he knew exactly what like that meant. When a police officer went to the crime scene the following day, he happened to notice Father LAVIGNE walking up and down the riverbank. Noticed that his vehicle was a Ford Mustang. Tire tracks found at the scene had been from a Ford vehicle, which made him think perhaps he should bring Father LAVIGNE in for an interview. LAVIGNE made lots of comments that didn't add up. The officers was still puzzled over the details when Father LAVIGNE, ever the cool and collected shepherd, began asking peculiar questions. He said, it's such a popular spot with all those cars and footprints. How can you tell which one matters? Harmless enough until he went on. If a stone was used and thrown in the river, would the blood still be on it, he asked. Oh, mercy. The good detective nearly dropped his pen. None of that had been even released to the public yet. Things were getting spicy. And when the dear father later refused to give a blood sample after hearing that the blood at the scene was type B, the same as his own, well, even a nun can recognize when the devil's hand is stirring the pot. Even weirder, Father LAVIGNE attended Danny's funeral, only staying for a few minutes and standing way towards the back. And then the Croteaus never heard from the Holy Father again. Although Danny's brother answered a call in the family's kitchen, it was from an anonymous caller. The caller said, "We're sorry for what happened to Danny. He saw something behind the circle he shouldn't have seen. It was an accident." His brother would later say the voice sounded just like Father LAVIGNE's. It wasn't long before all of Danny's brothers came forward to the police about all the times they had been assayed by Father LAVIGNE. The abuse had been going on for years. As the investigation deepened, whispers began to multiply like weeds after rain. More and more boys came forward and had stories. Ugly ones. The kind that makes a nun's stomach twist and her cross rattle. On April 30th, a high school boy came forward. He spoke a night spent at church with Father LAVIGNE, pouring him some drinks. No altar boy should know the taste of, and of hands that wondered where holiness had no business being. But the cruelest part, the part that still hurtles the soul, was what came after. The next morning, LAVIGNE forced the boy to go to confession. To him. Imagine that, my children, making the lamb confess to the wolf. On May 4th, LAVIGNE agreed to a polygraph test. The examiner concluded there was erratic and inconsistent responses, and he was therefore unable to render a definite opinion as to the subject's truthfulness. The police also claimed that the tire tracks did not match LAVIGNE's Mustang track. In those first terrible days, Carl and Bunny could not comprehend what had been done to their boy, or why. Grief clouded reason, and denial wrapped itself around their hearts like a blanket against the cold. Even when the whispers grew louder, when they heard Father LAVIGNE had been inappropriate with other boys, they just couldn't bring themselves to believe it. Not him, not the man who'd sat at their table, blessed their food, and called their son his little helper. But time, my children, has a cruel way of clearing fog. As the months passed, they began to look back. Really look back at all those moments that once seemed harmless. The gifts, the extra groceries, the new clothes, the laughter, the trips, the late nights, the sleepovers at the rectory. The morning the boys came home sick or hungover or silent. Then came his insistence on closing the casket. His absence at the wake, his swift exit after the funeral, his sudden silence afterwards, no denial, no defense. And when a church lawyer came knocking with money and condolence in the same breath, well, that's when the scales truly fell from their eyes. What once felt like kindness now reeked of corruption. Every prayer, every smile, every blessing tainted. However, bizarre behavior and serial abuse do not prove guilt. Investigators complained there just wasn't enough evidence. In fact, there was none. They believed LAVIGNE and Danny were together that Friday, but they could never put Danny with him. LAVIGNE could neither be placed at the scene, nor could it be tied to physical evidence recovered from the scene. Just like that, the case was laid to rest. Officially deemed inactive due to lack of evidence, a dozen boxes, each stamped with the name Croteau, tucked away into a dusty evidence locker, left to grow old in the dark. The murder of a 13-year-old altar boy once whispered about in pews and police halls alike slowly slipped from conversation. Papers stopped printing his name. The town stopped asking questions. Forgotten? Buried? Easier that way, isn't it? Especially for the church. My people certainly know how to cover their sins up. Oh my. They do. If they can't lie their way out, they pay their way out. For 20 long years, Danny's story gathered dust, while his killer kept preaching, smiling, and serving communion like nothing ever happened, and moved from church to church because of the past accusations. In late September 1991, a family from Shelburne Falls, a town village of 1700 in central Massachusetts, 8 miles from the Vermont border, accused their priest of abusing their sons. He was the pastor at St. Joseph's Church. His name was Richard LAVIGNE. Then on October 19, 1991, when the Greenfield police finally issued that warrant for Father Richard LAVIGNE, 3 boys came forward. Only 9, 18, and 20 spoke of terrible things that happened between 1988 and 1991, things no heart should have to carry. By 4:20 the next afternoon, the Chicopee detectives had him right outside his folks' place at 30 Colonial Circle. Father LAVIGNE, a man of the cloth, was now the first priest in all of Western Massachusetts history to be charged with child essay. At his arraignment, a lawyer hired by the Catholic Church and surrounded by half a dozen church officials, he pled not guilty and was released. Not long after this, another man came forward who was a boy when LAVIGNE was the camp counselor, just out of high school. The then 6-year-old told his grandmother he was taken to the secluded pond hidden by overgrown brush by Dickie, who tickled him, then opened his own pants and requested the boy touch his privates. He then opened the boy's pants and fondled him. LAVIGNE had been fired after this. In just a few months, 18 boys accused LAVIGNE of SI. One was a Chicopee boy who had lived right next door to Father LAVIGNE's aunt and uncle. Another, Lord help us, was his very own kin, a 10-year-old cousin. Some victims reached out to investigators but begged to remain quiet, fearing the wrath of holy men who should have been their protectors. Letters started pouring into the state police barracks in Northampton, each one telling more of the same heartbreak. One dated October 25th carried a secret that burned like incense on the altar. A 20-year-old man claimed that he and his brother, both victims, had once told Father Leo Neal, Bishop promised Father LAVIGNE would be watched, kept from children and sent to counseling, but heaven help us, he did not a blessed thing. The church, as usual, kept this kind of abuse silent. On February 14, 1992, Valentine's Day, he was indicted on charges involving 5 victims and molesting 2 and fondling 3. LAVIGNE was given 10 years on probation. He settled in Asheville with a $1,030 monthly check and a $8,000 a year medical plan. He got off scot-free. Was even given money. In 2003, 3 young boys exposed a 1970s Springfield priest ring that involved LAVIGNE as one of the abusers. The 1970s ring was described as a victim-swapping nest of pedos who met regularly and abused together, often with non-priest associates. They met in pairs and in larger groups to share and trade boys. Members passed them on as they aged out of one abuser's preference to others with older tastes. LAVIGNE preferred younger boys and reportedly handed his victims off when they reached 11 or so. He remained in contact and still occasionally abused the boys, but he was no longer their primary abuser. Danny was abused by men other than LAVIGNE, and it is believed LAVIGNE passed him on to a priest friend in the year before his death. As many as 60 abusers who were priests had connections with LAVIGNE. Ring members met at churches, rectories, private residence, state parks, and church or camps. The priests would throw master parties with these boys. That is terrifying, really terrifying, especially as a nun. Lord have mercy on our souls. Some people believe Father LAVIGNE wasn't the only one there when Danny was brutally murdered on the Chicopee River. In 2021, Father LAVIGNE was dying from complications of COVID-19. For so many years, us nuns prayed that Father LAVIGNE would speak. We prayed he would look up on his sins and seek the mercy he so often preached. Then at the very end, he did. Not to a priest, not to God, but to the police. Say he was weak, near death, his voice little more than a whisper. He admitted what we already knew, that he was there by the river the night Danny had died. Said the boy had angered him, that things went too far. But he never said the words we needed to hear. He never said, I killed him. Even in his last confession, he hid behind the fog of half-truths and careful phrasing. This is his last police interview, spoken from his deathbed.
Speaking about Danny Croteau 2 days ago, he was a strange, interesting kid. You know, not too bright. Always trying to make jokes about things. And if he didn't answer, he'd increase his voice. Then he'd turn around and say, "Will you shut up?"
Why did you go down there with him?
To the river?
Yes.
You wanted to see the waterfall. Up close.
Then what happened?
So I took them on the other side of Sree River. And we walked up and down. And that's all I can remember about that.
Why did you hit him when he was down by the riverbank? Why would you do it down there?
I don't remember hitting him down by the riverbank. But giving him a good shove.
You did give him a good shove? And why did you give him a good shove?
Because he was being, how should I say? Well, for the same reason you probably push your own son. Said, hey Billy, you don't do that.
Explain to me how you came across the body.
I just saw it floating.
You saw it floating. And how did you know it was Danny?
The way it was just,
And what did you do after you saw the body in the water?
I don't remember what I did. I don't remember telling anyone.
Did you tell the police?
I don't believe I did.
I don't believe you did either. Did you confide in any friends?
No, that's not something I should reply to. I just remember being heartbroken when I saw his body going down the river, knowing I was responsible for giving him a good shove, you know?
And you remember seeing him face down in the river?
Yeah,
And that was after you left him there.
yeah,
That was the same day that you left him there.
right.
Okay.
My greatest regret,
Do you say that's your greatest regret?
my great regret,
To your great regret? How did you feel when you returned home?
kind of heavy-hearted.
Why?
Well, he was a nice little kid. Kind of dumb, but still charming in a way. If I share this with public, they probably wouldn't believe it. If I say they wouldn't believe it, they would probably build conjecture around the revelation that I made.
Yes.
I sort of forget the whole thing, frankly. And see his face around the water is just not something you have to keep in mind.
Do you feel you put that out of your mind?
Yeah, pretty much.
Because as far as I know, you've never told this to anyone else before.
No, I haven't.
He died the next day alone, no collar, no absolution. Just a man with blood on his hands and secrets still clinging to his tongue. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. James 1:12-15. That tells a powerful story. Those words do. Desire began his fall. Not the desire for God's grace, but for power, control, and flesh. When the desire took root, it bore its fruit: lies, abuse, destruction. The kind of sin that doesn't stay hidden beneath vestments. For years, that sin grew quietly, like a poison vine wrapping around the altar rail. Strangled innocence, faith, and even the church that sheltered him. And in the end, just as Scripture says, sin gave birth to death. The death of a child, the death of trust, the death of a man's soul long before his body ever failed. May you rest in peace, Danny. May your soul rest in peace. I'll see you next week for HOLLYWEEN at the Murder She Shed. I know, you'll probably miss Mullet Man Mike, but I'm telling you, that's a filthy soul. A nun cannot be around. So, I asked him not to be here tonight. I'm sorry if that hurt y'all's feelings. Some of y'all didn't like Mullet Man Mike, and I understand. I completely understand. He kind of stinks sometimes. Not gonna lie. I mean, like I said, I'm only a nun, not an angel. I tell the truth. Sleep tight. Stay blessed. And if you hear knocking on your window tonight, it's probably just me. reminding you to go to Mass this Sunday. See y'all next week at the Murder She Shed.
Do you love your mama? Do you love Murder She Shed? Do you love your subscribers? I knew you did. You're such a good boy.